long time no see. I have been away for a really long time, and a big part of that is because last year we did a big house move, and then I had to get my new office all set up, and there were just a lot of other things going on. And now I'm ready to get back into it, and I'm reading some books, and I wanted to share the books I am reading with you. So today what I'm going to do is mostly talk about the stuff I've read this month, January 2020. Some of them are newer-ish books, and some of them are much older, or in fact I've reread a couple of books this month just to see if I still felt the same way about them now as I did back when I read them originally, and we'll talk about that too. So the first book I read this month, and I actually started it at the end of last year, but it was Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty? I don't know how she says it, but I do watch her YouTube channel. If you haven't seen it, give it a try. It's Ask a Mortician. She's really funny and interesting, and I found her YouTube, and then I realized she'd written some books, so I picked up this one from my local indie bookstore. It's good. It's as cute and funny as her channel is, but if you've watched a lot of her channel, a lot of the information in this book is pretty much similar or the same to stuff she's done videos on. So I enjoyed this book, but probably would have enjoyed it more if I hadn't already watched a bunch of her videos. I am still curious to go read some of her other books and see if those are a little bit different or, you know, whatever. But anyway, this is a recommend if you're interested in basically death, dying, body stuff. She talks about whether or not your cat will eat your eyeballs. That's called postmortem predation. Basically, it's when an animal will postmortem, after death, predate, be a predator to the flesh of a dead creature. Particularly an animal that wouldn't normally, like, not necessarily normally a carrion animal, but an animal that will eat the flesh of something dead when it has no other options. So, you know, if you were to die at home and nobody found you for a few days and no one was there to feed your cat, would your cat eat your eyeballs? You can read the book and find out. So that's a good one. The second book I read in January, I actually reread this, Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. So I had to read this in grad school, which was longer ago than I like to admit. I read it when I was about the same age as Chris McCandless, who is the young man who dies in this book. Spoiler, sorry. It was a pretty famous case in the early 90s. Basically, Chris McCandless was a son of a fairly wealthy family who chose to head off into the wilderness and ended up passing away in Alaska of starvation. And so Into the Wild is Krakauer basically retracing McCandless's travels up until that point and trying to piece together maybe what had happened and what some of his reasons were for doing what he did. I remember really liking this book when I read it in grad school. I didn't particularly identify with McCandless. My mother is from Alaska, so I spent a lot of time in Alaska as a child visiting my grandparents. But I don't have like any particular desire to go camping or anything. I'm not that kind of person. But I just remember thinking, wow, it's such a tragic story. I think I'm in particular drawn to stories of if only, like, I like stories about Tsar Nicholas II and his family and all the, like, moments that could have been different and changed the path of their lives. So that spoke to me, but rereading this book actually really kind of infuriated me a bit. I was kind of annoyed with Krakauer, actually, because I feel like he lionizes McCandless a little bit, and I think that's because Krakauer is himself an adventurer of sorts. He likes to, mountain climb and stuff, and maybe he identified quite a bit with McCandless. I don't know. But I felt like he made a lot of excuses for some of the behaviors that McCandless had that were maybe not stellar. He was very, cruel to his family in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean, he was foolish in a lot of ways that I feel like Krakauer kind of, youth, and that adventurous spirit. And I kind of go, yeah, maybe it's because I'm a mom now. And the idea of that, I'm like, there are limits. There are, reasonable, limits to that. Maybe that is part of what has changed the way I feel about the book overall. But it was still a pretty good read, but I was just way more frustrated with the narrative this time than I remember being 20 years ago. Okay. A couple of the other books I read, I don't have because they were library books and I had to return them. Hang on, let me think. There was, I've got to look it up. Hang on. Yay for Goodreads, saving my bacon here, reminding me of what I read that I've already forgotten, which probably tells you everything you need to know about how I felt about these books. One was Death Brings a Shadow by Rosemary Simpson, which is a mystery novel, and I didn't realize it when I picked it up. It was the fourth in the series, so the two lead characters are kind of already established, and maybe I entered at the wrong moment, but the mystery itself is what interested me. The main character, Prudence, is a Yankee. She's from New York. This is 1889. And she goes down to the barrier islands of Georgia for her friend Eleanor's wedding, because Eleanor is marrying the son of what used to be a plantation owner, but the war kind of put them into genteel poverty, I guess. And then Eleanor, it's not really a spoiler because it's written on the flap of the book, Eleanor dies mysteriously, and it becomes this whole big mystery thing. I didn't particularly care for Prudence as a main character, and I don't know if it was just this book or if she's just annoying to me in general. Maybe it's because I'm from the South and some of that Yankee pride is a bit irritating to me. I always feel a little bit weird, again, coming from the South. I feel a little bit weird when books start talking about ex-slaves doing voodoo and black and light magic and things, because I feel like there's a real stereotype there, and it also intrudes on some of the truths. I feel like Rosemary Simpson tried really hard to be delicate with that and respectful of the culture. I do believe that. She wasn't disrespectful, but it always makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Because I come from New Orleans area, and I have some feelings, some feels about it. It was okay, but the culprit is very, very obvious really early on. Some of the characters are very one-dimensional. They don't really have any other attributes aside from the one thing that they are, bad, basically, or not bad, or just angry, or or weepy. It didn't float my boat. The other thing I read was Royal Holiday, which was by Jasmine Guillory. And she's from Oakland, which is not far from where I live now. And again, this was one that calls itself number 4 in a series, but my understanding from everything I've read is that the series is kind of loosely linked. It's like some of the same characters, but all the books are more or less standalone. So the main character in this book is a woman named Vivian. She's like 54, I want to say. And she goes with her daughter, who apparently was the main character of like the last book, to England because her daughter is going to dress the Duchess, this unnamed Duchess, that it's not clear. I loosely seems to be Meghan Markle, but I'm not sure. So I guess this daughter is a like fashionista, wardrobe person, whatever the word for that is. I should know the word for that. Then Vivian goes off and has this romance with the Queen's private secretary. It's all very wish fulfillment. It's all set at Christmas, and it's all really kind of sweet, but there's not enough conflict to make it interesting, was my problem with it. It just, there are these moments where it seems like there's going to be a conflict, but they're resolved in like 2 pages. It's like, there's no sustained problem, except maybe the guy that she likes is having a drawn-out argument with his nephew about whether or not the nephew should go to art school instead of Oxford. We're not particularly invested as readers in this, so it doesn't end up mattering to us one way or another. I think the author tries to get us to care, but we don't get deep enough into anybody's worlds to really form attachments, or at least I didn't. Maybe I would have been more attached to Vivian if I'd read about her in a previous book or something. It all goes pretty well, predictably, as planned, and so, again, like maybe not the number 1 book I've read recently. I think I gave it like 2 stars, 3 stars on Goodreads. Finally, the book I'm currently rereading is Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. Okay, so this book, I have a long history with this book, okay? I read this for the first time in high school, because that was the thing you did, right? You read the gothy vampire novels. And I really liked it. Set in New Orleans. It felt, it felt... and I've actually reread it several times since. I think I read it maybe once every 5 or 6 years. So I was due. I've been missing New Orleans a little bit, missing the South, kind of going, I want to go back to New Orleans, I want to go back to Savannah, so I picked up this book to reread. And, I don't know what's happened to me since the last time I read it, but Louis just keeps saying, okay, well, if you haven't read the book, or you don't know anything about the book, I'd be astounded, but to fill you in, it's the story of Louis Pointulac, who was a plantation owner in the... Hang on, my cat is trying to climb on my snake's cage. Hold on a sec. Okay, my cat is like in love with my snake. My snake wants nothing to do with him, but he thinks she's the love of his life, and he's constantly trying to find ways to get to her, and she's just like, dude, no. So I have to spend a lot of time getting him away from her. Anyway. Interview with the Vampire is about Louis Pointulac, who was a planter in 1791, if I'm remembering right, is when the story starts. And when his brother dies, it's very different from the movie. So in the movie, I think it's his wife and child die. But in the novel, it's that his brother has died. And Louis kind of feels guilty and loses the will to live. This is kind of Louis in a nutshell. No will to live. And yet, this vampire named Lestat, you may have heard of him, comes in and makes Louis a vampire. Not because he has any particular affection for Louis, but because Louis is rich and Lestat wants all his stuff. He's like, I want your money, I want your big house, I want, And so instead of Louis dying, which is kind of what deep down he really wants to do, now he gets to live forever and be depressed, like, in perpetuity, I guess. And my real, like, frustration as I'm reading this, because I'm like, I think Goodreads has me at about 70% done. But, like, my big frustration is how often Louis like, I hated Lestat, I hated him, and I'm just like, it feels very redundant. And I realize he's telling this story, I mean, it's called Interview with a Vampire. Louis is telling this story to a boy. He's just called the boy. He later gets the name Daniel, because it's a series of books, right? And way down the line, Daniel becomes a whole thing. But, he's telling Daniel, oh, I hated him so much, he was terrible, but, like, Louis never leaves him because Louis is constantly afraid that Lestat knows something that he hasn't told him yet, like, he's afraid to leave because he's afraid that maybe he's afraid that maybe he doesn't have a key piece of information about being a vampire yet, and if he leaves, he'll miss out on this really important piece of information. And, at some point, it's just like, dude, no, just go. Like, you can figure it out on your own. Like, you clearly have managed this long, because, like, we're, like, 65 years in, and, like, it's like, dude, stop being so miserable and just get on with your, like, immortal life here. And then, Lestat makes a daughter for them. And so, in a way, it's kind of, I guess, for 1975, 76, it was kind of progressive, because it was like, Claudia, she's this little girl vampire. In the movie, she's a little bit older, but in the book, she's like 5. She's like this 5-year-old girl. So she can't really manage on her own. She needs adults around her, even if she's, hundreds of years old, she's always going to look 5, so she can't really go through the world, as an adult, because she doesn't appear to be an adult. So anyway, that's really frustrating for her, which I totally get. But in a way, it was kind of progressive, because it's like this girl and her 2 dads, right? Even if it's a vampire family, it's, this weird. But the 2 dads are far from loving towards each other. They both love Claudia, and that's kind of what holds the family together until Claudia gets fed up with everything, and things go from there. If you've read the book or seen the movie, you have an idea of what happens. I won't give it away, though, in case you haven't read it or watched it. I loved this series of books up until the last couple, which came out more recently. Prince Lestat, I think. And I couldn't even finish that one. And then I think there was another one about Atlantis. Lestat goes to Atlantis or something. I don't know. I couldn't invest. It got, even for me, a little too off the rails at that point. So, what's funny is that I've reread this book so many times, and then I always try to reread The Vampire Lestat, which comes after this one, and I never can get through that one again. I read it once right after this one, like when I was in high school, and I liked it, I guess. I must have, because I did. I read all the way through Blackwood Farm, which is the last one in the series, and I read all the ancillary ones, like Pandora, which I loved. Merrick, I think, is great. I've reread Merrick several times. I've reread Pandora several times. Some are better than others. The Vampire Mon's not one of my favorites, for whatever reason. But, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's a little more frustrating now than I remember it being when I was, like, even the last time I read it, I don't remember finding it as kind of intolerable. I find myself skimming the large passages of description because Anne Rice writes really lush description, and she's really good at it. Like, she's really good at setting the scene, but sometimes it's a little more than I need. And, you know, Louis kind of in love with his senses and everything because his senses are also heightened. And so, I don't know, I just feel like maybe it's a little too much. Maybe nowadays, because things are written to go really quickly, things tend to be fast-paced or whatever, like the fact that this is relatively slow and padded with the description and stuff, maybe my sensibilities have changed with the times, and this is harder now to read than it used to be. Maybe, I don't know, but it's not by any means a bad story. Louis used to be my favorite, and now I'm finding him a little bit, maybe I'm a little more Lestat than I used to be, because I'm finding him a little irritating. I'm like, dude, really, just, so, anyway, those are the books I've read and am reading. One little thing I wanted to, like, here's my shameless plug. This is my book, my most recent one. It actually had been published by another publisher some years ago, and I got the rights back, and I put it out in a lovely paperback form, and it recently made number 3 on Amazon's LGBT historical fiction list. I was super excited. So you can get the ebook or you can get the paperback. It's the story of a British spy in 1960s London, and, you know, his love life getting tangled up with his work, and he just happens to be gay, but that's not really the point of the story. The short screenplay won an award. You know, if you like Jon Le Carre or Graham Greene, maybe take a look at it. The Fall and Rise of Peter Stoller. And yeah, that about covers it. I did read a couple of manga this month, but because they were like kind of far down, I mean, they were like a series, right? So I'll just mention in passing. Last year I read all of Fruits Basket, and really enjoyed it. So this month I read Fruits Basket again, whatever the sequel is. I read the first 2. I haven't read the third. There's only 3 of them. I need to get the third one. And the other manga I've been reading is Takane Hana, or Takane and Hana. And that's like on volume 13 or 14 now. And that one I bought in Japanese and have been slowly translating because my Japanese is really rusty and it takes me a long time. It'll be out in English before I get done with volume 14, I think. But yeah, so I definitely recommend, I shouldn't say I definitely, Takane Hana. It's about like this 28-year-old guy and this 18-year-old girl. She's in high school and he's like the scion of a big corporation, and his grandfather wants him to settle down and get married, you know, and so he sets up a marriage meeting, and he thinks that Hana, the girl, is older than, well, he thinks that Hana's her sister. But Hana's sister had refused to go to the meeting, so Hana goes. And hilarity ensues, hijinks ensue. And there are definite problems with it. My cat is playing with a toy back there. Sorry if you're hearing that. That is my cat playing with like this mouse that kind of chirps. There are definite problems with it. In large part with the way Takane he's so egotistical, but he kind of negs on Hana a bit in a way that is at the very least borderline abusive, if not fully abusive in some cases, I think. And that's all done for, you know, laughs or drama. And in the past couple volumes, it kind of just went off the rails for me a little bit. I won't get into it. It's really cute, but I am super, super aware of some of the problematic stuff in that series, is all I'm going to say about it. But if it sounds like something you'd enjoy and you can, like, see past some of the issues and just kind of take it for what it is. My daughter's read it, and we've talked about not letting boys treat you a certain way, and, you know, and things like that, that's not romantic. That's, you know, controlling. And I mean, and that's something that you would want to be aware of reading it, or if you knew, like, a younger girl reading it. But overall, it's just kind of cute, and, you know, eventually Takane kind of starts to figure it out, which is nice, I guess. Okay, so now, finally, I really am done. Thank you for checking in. Next month, I'll try and cover whatever I read in February. Last year, I read 81 books. I doubt I'll get quite that far this year, because last year I didn't write anything except one short story, which, if you want to read it, it's for free on East of the Web. Look up Origami of the Heart. Contemporary, set in Japan, male-male romance. Super cute, if you like it. But yeah, now that I'm writing again, I may not read quite as many books, but I will try and do these wrap-ups at least once a month, so you can maybe find some stuff you might want to read. Thanks.